Most Americans are walking around today with no idea that a fundamental shift in their government just happened. Not because they're not paying attention, but because this ruling wasn't presented to them as the earthquake it actually is. A Supreme Court decision just landed that quietly changes the balance of power in the United States, between the government and the people, between regulators and innovators, between the rules we've lived under for decades and the future that's now taking shape. And the strangest part is how silently it slipped into the news cycle. No dramatic press conferences, no emergency panels, just a legal ruling that most people shrugged off. But to the people who understand how the system works, lawyers, CEOs, policymakers, tech moguls, and yes, people like Elon Musk, the impact was immediate. They know what it means when the Supreme Court steps in and redraws the boundaries of federal agency power. Because when you change who gets to make the rules, you change everything that depends on those rules. This outcome wasn't a surprise to legal observers. The court has been signaling a shift for years. Case after case hinted that the justices were ready to curb the reach of federal agencies that touch nearly every aspect of life, from banking to energy, from transportation to data privacy. Now that shift is no longer a hint. It's reality, and it's already setting off a cascade of responses behind closed doors. If you're wondering what makes this ruling so dramatic, you have to understand the structure of American governance. Congress writes laws. Agencies interpret and enforce those laws. Courts referee the boundaries. For decades, agencies had broad authority to interpret ambiguous laws. If Congress wasn't precise, agencies filled in the blanks. This ruling effectively tightens that ability. It says, if Congress didn't speak clearly, agencies don't get to make sweeping decisions anyway. That sounds technical, but its consequences are not. Not even close. The EPA, the SEC, the FTC, the FCC, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Energy, every major regulator now has a smaller toolbox unless Congress specifically authorizes their actions. And in a divided political era where Congress struggles to pass anything complex, that means many agencies suddenly face new limitations. The tech world felt the tremor instantly. Companies like Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, Starlink, OpenAI competitors, AI startups, energy innovators, they all operate in spaces where regulations shape timelines, risks, and costs. So when the Supreme Court narrows regulatory reach, those industries see a chance to accelerate. Not recklessly, but more freely. And nobody understands that better than Elon Musk. Not because he's part of the case, but because the sectors he dominates are some of the most heavily regulated in the country. Spaceflight, autonomous driving, satellite communications, AI development, alternative energy, national-scale infrastructure. Every one of those industries has faced barriers created not by Congress, not by courts, but by agencies interpreting statutes passed decades ago. So a ruling that restricts agencies from stretching their authority? That's fuel for innovators. It's a signal that certain walls are lower today than they were last week. But this isn't just about potential openings for tech giants or industry leaders. This is about something deeper, the shifting architecture of American power. Critics see danger. They argue that without strong oversight, big corporations could overstep, exploit markets, or destabilize entire sectors. They say federal agencies exist precisely because Congress can't manage the complexity of modern industries. Supporters see liberation. They argue that agencies became too powerful, making rules that were never approved by elected representatives. They believe the ruling restores democratic accountability. And both sides have a point. That's why the ruling is so disruptive. Because it forces the country to rethink how regulation is created, justified, and enforced. This ruling essentially hands a challenge to Congress. If you want something regulated, say it clearly. Put it in writing. Debate it. Vote on it. But does anyone honestly expect Congress to move quickly on complex, technical issues like AI governance, satellite networks, autonomous vehicles, or next-generation energy grids? Probably not. And that's where the uncertainty begins. In the absence of precise laws, companies will test the edges. States will create their own patchwork of rules. Courts will field case after case, trying to interpret what Congress meant or didn't mean. We're entering a period where innovation will speed up, but legal fights will too. That's the paradox of the moment. More room to build, but also more room to challenge. The ruling doesn't just change the pace of innovation. It changes where the battles take place. Instead of fighting with agencies, companies will fight with states, courts, and sometimes with each other. And those fights will shape who leads the next wave of technological and economic growth in America. This is why Musk and other major players are watching so closely. They know that regulatory structure can either choke an emerging industry or unleash it. For years, Musk has argued that bureaucratic inertia slows progress. SpaceX had to push through layers of regulatory approval for launches. Tesla clashed with regulators over self-driving systems. Starlink fought spectrum battles. Neuralink faced medical device hurdles. A Supreme Court ruling limiting regulatory flexibility won't remove those barriers completely, but it changes the tone. It shifts leverage. It signals that courts, not agencies, are now the final word on what's allowed. Some see opportunity. Some see risk. Everyone sees a new landscape forming. You're going to hear a lot of arguments in the coming months. Politicians will spin the ruling as either a victory for freedom or a threat to public welfare. Activists will paint it as the beginning of corporate dominance or the end of regulatory abuse. But the reality is more nuanced, more complex, more consequential. This ruling resets the foundation on which modern regulation stands. And when you reset the foundation, everything built on top of it shifts, even if it looks the same from the outside. Most Americans won't notice the effects right away. They'll feel them gradually, in the price of energy, in the rollout speed of new technologies, in how companies handle privacy, in how quickly new industries appear, and in how often headlines start with "a federal court says." By the time the public realizes what happened, the ripple effects will already be touching every corner of the economy. Washington knows this. Silicon Valley knows it. Corporate boards know it. Governors know it. Judges know it. The ruling didn't just decide a case. It created a new frontier. And the people who move first in a new frontier usually control how the next chapter unfolds. This is the moment when the quiet shifts matter more than the loud headlines. When the legal language matters more than the talking points. When the country starts adjusting to a decision most people haven't even heard about. But they will, because this ruling is going to reshape the next decade whether the public is ready or not. And this is only the beginning of the story. If part one was about the ruling itself, part two is about the chain reaction it's already triggering. The quiet scramble happening inside government offices, state capitals, tech labs, and corporate boardrooms. Because the moment a Supreme Court decision shifts the balance of power, everyone who depends on that balance starts recalculating. And make no mistake, this time the recalculation is massive. Inside federal agencies, lawyers are huddling over old regulations, trying to decide which ones can survive under the court's new standard and which ones are now vulnerable. This isn't just a theoretical exercise. Agencies know lawsuits are coming. Industries that have felt boxed in for years suddenly see an opening to push back. And industries that were hoping for more aggressive oversight now fear their protections just got weaker. The ripple effect is real, and it's moving fast. Politicians are already reacting too, even if many of them won't say it publicly. The ruling forces Congress into a position it hasn't occupied in decades. The branch that must write clear, detailed laws if it wants anything to stick. But clarity takes time, and Congress isn't built for speed. So while lawmakers argue over wording, agencies slow down, companies speed up, and states try to fill the power vacuum in their own ways. That's where things get complicated, because once states start writing their own rules for industries that operate nationally, AI, electric vehicles, energy grids, digital privacy, satellites. You get a patchwork instead of a uniform system. And that patchwork can become a battlefield. California goes one way. Texas goes another. Florida takes a third position. New York adds its own layer on top. For companies operating across all those states, compliance becomes a maze. Not impossible, but messy, expensive, and unpredictable. And unpredictability is the one thing businesses hate more than regulation itself. Now here's where Elon Musk becomes a central figure, not because he caused the ruling, but because he thrives in moments like this. Moments where the rules are shifting and the people who move first gain the advantage. SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, Starlink, XAI, every one of those ventures operates at the leading edge of regulatory oversight. When oversight tightens, he adapts. When oversight loosens, he accelerates. And right now, he's accelerating. His critics see chaos in this ruling. He sees room to innovate without the same bureaucratic drag he's been fighting for years. But it's not just about Musk. It's about an entire class of innovators who believe federal agencies have slowed American progress, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes needlessly. To them, the ruling is a correction. To others, it's a warning siren that corporations will now push harder and faster than regulators can keep up with. Both interpretations are shaping the next wave of decisions happening in Washington. The Department of Energy is reconsidering its standards for emerging energy technologies. The Department of Transportation is reevaluating its authority over autonomous vehicles. The FCC is analyzing how this affects satellite spectrum. The FTC is questioning how aggressively it can pursue tech antitrust cases. Every agency is rewriting its playbook, even if they won't say it publicly. Meanwhile, ports across the country are gearing up for a flood of challenges. Lawyers are already drafting the arguments, and judges know they'll soon be asked to decide issues that agencies used to handle. That's the irony. Limiting agencies doesn't eliminate conflict. It just relocates it. And when conflict moves into the courtroom, decisions slow down. Some companies will love that. Slower enforcement means more room to maneuver. Others will hate it. Slow decisions mean uncertainty, and uncertainty affects investment. But the biggest shift is happening out of public view. The political alignment forming around this ruling. Republican lawmakers see an opportunity to cut back what they call administrative overreach. Democrats see a need to expand congressional authority to protect consumers. Tech leaders see a chance to shape the future without constant roadblocks. Regulators see a threat to their ability to manage modern risks. States see an opening to become power players in national policy. For the first time in decades, the regulatory center of gravity isn't obvious. It's not clearly in Washington. It's not fully in the courts. It's not entirely in Congress. And it's not purely in the hands of corporations. It's somewhere in between, all of them pulling at the same system from different angles. That's why this ruling isn't just big. It's transformational. It disrupts the old model that defined American governance since the 20th century and replaces it with something more fragmented, more competitive, and in some ways more volatile. And here's the part most people don't realize yet. The industries most affected by this ruling are the ones that determine the country's future: energy, AI, transportation, biotech, and telecommunications. These aren't small sectors. They're the backbone of the next economic era. So when the rules governing them shift, the future shifts with them. The ruling effectively opens a window for companies to push the envelope, and Elon Musk is already positioning himself at that window. SpaceX is moving faster on launch timelines. Tesla is doubling down on autonomous driving. Neuralink is preparing for broader clinical trials. Starlink is expanding globally with fewer regulatory choke points. XAI is scaling in ways that were harder before. He's always moved aggressively, but now the terrain favors aggressiveness even more. Yet there's a catch, one the public hasn't felt yet. When innovation accelerates faster than regulation, Mistakes can happen, not because people are reckless, but because the pace outruns the guardrails. And when something goes wrong in a world with weaker agency oversight, courts are left to sort through the wreckage case by case. That's why this ruling is both a promise and a warning. A promise of faster innovation. A warning that the cost of mistakes may now fall more heavily on the courts and the states rather than the federal government. The coming years will be shaped by how well those institutions adjust. Some will adapt quickly. Some will resist. Some will be overwhelmed. But the overall direction is clear. The country is entering a period where innovation advances with fewer obstacles, while regulatory clarity becomes harder to achieve. This is the kind of environment where influence matters more than ever, and Musk, whether you like him or not, is one of the few people positioned to shape what comes next. The Supreme Court didn't intend to empower any one person. That's not how rulings work. But the consequences of this decision will empower whoever moves fastest, thinks longest term, and leverages the uncertainty to reshape entire industries. And the people doing that aren't waiting for the public to catch up. They're already in motion. If Part 2 was about the reaction inside Washington and corporate America, Part 3 is about something even more important. How this ruling begins reshaping real life for ordinary Americans, even before they realize what's happening. Because every major legal shift eventually lands in the real world, in bills, in prices, in jobs, in the speed of new technology, in the choices available to consumers. And this one is no different. The public won't see the effects all at once. It won't feel like a dramatic event. It will feel like a series of small changes that build over time, until one day people look around and realize the country's operating under a different rulebook. The first place this will show up is energy. For years, federal agencies have held enormous power over energy policy, approvals, emission standards, infrastructure projects, environmental reviews. This ruling weakens the tools those agencies use to enforce those policies. That means oil and gas companies see an opening. Renewable energy companies see an opening. Nuclear startups see an opening. Even local utilities see an opening. Everyone suddenly feels freer to push their own agenda. But when everyone accelerates at the same time, the national energy landscape becomes more unpredictable. In some states, you'll see faster adoption of new tech. In others, slower transitions and more fights over environmental protections. In others, a rush of lawsuits that stalls everything. Good or bad depends entirely on where people live. But the friction that used to be centralized at the federal level is now scattering across the country. Transportation is next. Self-driving cars, electric vehicles, new manufacturing plants, drone delivery systems. These all depended heavily on agency interpretation of outdated laws. Now companies can challenge restrictions more easily. For Tesla and other EV manufacturers, that's a huge shift. For legacy automakers trying to meet federal rules, it complicates their planning. For states, it forces them to create their own oversight frameworks. And states don't all share the same vision. Imagine autonomous driving being legal under one system in Nevada, restricted in Pennsylvania, tightly controlled in Massachusetts, and barely addressed in half the country. That's the patchwork the ruling makes possible. And once industries face a patchwork, they start building products for the most lenient environment, because that becomes the path of least resistance. That's how innovation speeds up in one region and slows down in another. AI is another sector reshaped by this ruling, and it might be the biggest one. Federal agencies were preparing to impose stricter guardrails on artificial intelligence, from training data to safety testing to deployment standards. This ruling forces them to rethink how far their authority stretches. Companies like xAI, OpenAI competitors, robotics startups, and automation firms now see room to push boundaries more quickly. That doesn't mean chaos. It means speed. It means breakthroughs arriving faster, before laws have time to catch up. And whenever technology outruns the law, society has to play catch up the hard way, through litigation, through state patchwork, or through crisis-driven legislation. America has seen this pattern before. Social media in the late 2000s, cryptocurrency in the 2010s, biotech disputes in the 1990s. Every time, the absence of clear regulation led to rapid innovation and rapid controversy. The difference now is that this ruling doesn't just delay regulation in one sector. It creates a universal structural slowdown across all federal oversight. That's why tech CEOs are energized and regulators are nervous. The next area shaped by this ruling is the job market. Regulation affects hiring, how companies onboard, how they classify employees, how they meet compliance requirements, how they use new tools to replace or augment workers. A weaker regulatory environment means companies experiment more aggressively. Automation grows faster. AI integration grows faster. Non-traditional employment models spread more widely. Some workers will benefit. Some will be displaced. But the pace of change will accelerate. That's the part that will hit the public hardest, not the legal theory, but the economic consequences. Even the housing market could feel this shift. Agencies that oversee mortgage systems, construction standards, zoning incentives, and federal lending programs may face new challenges to their authority. That creates room for private lenders, private developers, and alternative financing models to expand. But it also creates uncertainty about long-term rules. And uncertainty affects affordability just as much as interest rates do. This ruling doesn't tell anyone what to build or how to build it, but it changes who gets the final say. That change trickles down into prices, timelines, and availability. Now here's the big question most people haven't asked yet. Who actually benefits most from a system where agencies are weaker, courts hold more power, and Congress must be clearer? The answer is simple. Those who can hire the best lawyers. Those who can move the fastest. Those who can operate in multiple states at once. Those who can adapt quicker than regulators can respond. Which is why Elon Musk becomes such a central figure in this moment. Not because the ruling is about him, but because the environment it creates is the one he's built his entire career navigating. He knows how to use regulatory uncertainty as momentum. He knows how to move when others pause. He knows how to challenge rules that were written before the world changed. Whether people admire that or resent it, the truth is the same. Musk is uniquely positioned to thrive in this new era. But so are his competitors. So are emerging startups. So are states trying to reinvent themselves as innovation hubs. The real story here isn't whether the ruling helps one person. It's that it tilts the entire competitive landscape toward speed, toward experimentation, toward risk-taking, toward whoever adapts the fastest. For ordinary Americans, the changes will arrive gradually, then suddenly. New technology appearing faster, old industries restructuring, prices shifting in unexpected ways, jobs evolving before people can adjust. This is how structural legal decisions work. They don't rewrite society in a day, but they change the trajectory for years. And right now, that trajectory is bending in a new direction. This is the turning point before the public notices, the quiet moment before the headlines get louder. And we're only halfway through the story. The country has entered a moment of transition, and most Americans don't realize how quickly everything is about to accelerate. A Supreme Court ruling like this doesn't just tweak regulations. It rearranges the entire system that controls them. When a single decision limits the power of federal agencies, the system doesn't pause to adapt. It scrambles. And right now, three forces are rushing to fill the vacuum. Corporations ready to move faster, states eager to control their own regulatory destiny, and courts preparing for a surge of challenges they didn't ask for but can't avoid. None of them are coordinating with each other. None of them share the same goals. And none of them fully understand the long-term effects of acting at the same time. This is how a fragmented landscape forms. Some states will decide they prefer tighter rules, believing federal oversight was the only thing keeping powerful industries in check. Others will go the opposite direction, loosening restrictions to attract investment, talent, and technological development. The result isn't a unified national framework. It's a patchwork, 50 different approaches competing for relevance. Imagine a future where one state allows fully autonomous highways while another bans self-driving vehicles from entire regions. Where one state launches aggressive AI oversight and another embraces rapid experimentation. Where one state accelerates nuclear energy development while another tries to block it entirely. This is no longer hypothetical. This is exactly where the ruling pushes the country. And in the middle of this regulatory reshuffling stands Elon Musk. Not because he influenced the decision, but because he knows how to navigate a fractured environment better than almost anyone. He has already spent years adapting Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, Starlink, and XAI to inconsistent rules across states and countries. He knows which jurisdictions move fast and which stall. He knows where regulators fight and where they cooperate. Now that Washington's authority has weakened, that experience becomes a strategic weapon. If one state hesitates on a permit, another will issue it. If one state slows down approvals for new factories, another will offer incentives to build immediately. If one region restricts new technologies, another will welcome them with open arms. And Musk, who always goes where momentum is possible, will adjust faster than the institutions trying to respond to him. But the story isn't just about innovators moving quickly. It's also about institutions trying to regain control in a world that's no longer waiting for them. Federal agencies now face limits they weren't prepared for. They can no longer rely on broad interpretations of old statutes. They can't act aggressively without risking legal challenges. So they slow down. They second-guess. They rewrite internal policies. They worry about losing in court. And while they're recalibrating, states and companies are speeding ahead. This shift won't hit Americans all at once. It will show up as unpredictable differences in opportunity, technology, and cost of living depending on where people live. One state may see new jobs explode in advanced manufacturing. Another may watch companies flee because the legal environment is too uncertain. One region might access cutting-edge transportation or energy systems years before the rest of the country. Another may fall behind because their regulatory approach is too cautious or too chaotic. This ruling doesn't only fragment policy. It fragments progress. Congress was technically handed more power through this decision, but the irony is unmistakable. Congress is the institution least capable of responding quickly enough to shape the fallout. The pace of modern technology is measured in months. The pace of Congress is measured in decades. So the power they were given falls, by default, to whoever moves fastest. And right now, the fastest actors are not in Washington. They're in state capitals and corporate headquarters. That's the hidden consequence most Americans haven't seen yet. Not the legal theory, not the constitutional framework, but the redistribution of power from one place to many, from a central authority to dozens of competing ones, from slow-moving regulatory systems to fast-moving innovators, from predictable rules to unpredictable competition. And once a country enters that kind of environment, there's no going back easily. This ruling didn't settle anything. It started something. A new phase where states, companies, and courts will shape the future more directly than federal agencies. A phase where innovation moves faster, risk moves faster, and public policy struggles to keep up. A phase where influence belongs to whoever adapts first. And the shift isn't coming someday. It's already here. Most Americans just haven't felt the impact yet. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.